Hey guys, so we're just trying to set up streaming, but the Wi-Fi is probably too patchy to do that. So we're going to record it and post it afterwards. Before we start, would you mind all just, if you have access to Facebook here, going to our group and filling out the registration form? We get funding from the Graduate Students Association, and the amount of funding we get depends on how many members we have. So the more members we have, the more money free of charge we have, and the more we can do. So a lot of people have liked the group on Facebook, and we've got a lot of members there, but not many of them are actually converting that into a registration. So if you could do that, that would be really helpful. Other than that, so I'll introduce Dr. Daniel Trevena, who's an anaesthetics registrar here at Royal Melbourne, who's going to be giving us an introduction to wilderness and expedition medicine.
Not a real doctor. Just a pretend one. How you going? I'm Dan. I'm an anaesthetics reg here, and I met Tom a few months ago when I got an email relatively out of the blue saying that you guys were starting a wilderness medicine society, which I think is a great idea for a number of reasons. One of which being that I did exactly the same thing about 5 years ago when I was a med student in Sydney. I started a Sydney Uni Wilderness Medicine Society, which is now defunct, I'm sure, but it was basically a few mates and I wanting to learn a bit more about this thing that we didn't really understand called wilderness medicine, and also try and legitimise medicine as a way to get outdoors and do some fun stuff. So it's with great pleasure to do your first presentation tonight. There's a few things I'll say. We initially talked about doing some stuff on altitude medicine, but I think maybe I'll just do a brief overview of what I think wilderness medicine is, and then tell you a bit about what I've done, which is not a great deal, but we'll talk about that, and then try and give you some ideas of where to go and what to do if you're interested in this kind of thing. Because I think when I was in your shoes, that's what I found the hardest was I knew I was really excited about doing some stuff, but I didn't really know what to do about it or even what I wanted to do. So I'll try and give you some ideas tonight. That's really the main session. So I'll start with this quote, which I quite like, by John Muir. So thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilised people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wilderness is a necessity. And I would argue that this is becoming more and more relevant to everyone in society, but particularly us and you as med students, soon to be doctors in the coming years. So what we'll talk about, I'll talk a little bit about what I think wilderness medicine is. Tell you a bit about my experience. I'll tell you about a trip that I did last year, which was probably my most significant experience in both climbing and in wilderness medicine, and try and give you some ideas and stimulus to talk about. So a few things to say. I'm not really very good at giving lectures, to be honest, and I don't want this to be a didactic session. This isn't really a didactic topic. I would hope if you're here at 6 o'clock that it's of interest to you, not because it's a lecture that you have to go to for med school. So I really want it to be more of a discussion. So if you have questions or comments or anything, just interrupt me. This is not me standing at the lecture, speaking down at you. And on that note, I might ask what you guys do. I know you're all second year medical students, but can you just sort of call out some outdoor things that you're interested in? I'm not looking for, I was the expedition doctor down to Antarctica for this winter, blah, blah, blah. I just want I like skiing, or, what do you guys do outdoors? Snowboarding, very good, excellent. And you've got an accent, where are you from?
Canada.
Did you learn to snowboard in Canada?
It's pretty good there.
It is, it's better than Australia, but that's all right. Anyone else? Does anyone else do anything outdoors, or do you all just sit inside and read textbooks now? Bushwalking, very good. In Australia?
Yeah.
Okay. In Victoria?
And I did a bit in Vietnam as well.
Oh, right, cool.
It wasn't actually bush, it was like rice fields. But yeah.
Okay, and where have you walked? Sort of. It's all the same. And where have you walked in Australia?
Well, I'm from Queensland, so I've done a fair bit in Queensland, like in the Gold Coast hinterlands and like North Queensland.
Okay.
Also in the Grampians once and this is
very good. Anyone else ever been outdoors for anything?
Cross-country skiing.
Cross-country skiing, awesome. Skate or classic?
Skate.
Skate, dang, nice. That's quite technical. Have you done that for long?
Yeah, my parents chose to not tell me that downhill skiing was a thing until we spotted the lifts. We did cross-country.
It's not a real thing. Cross-country's way better. Do you eat scroggin?
Pardon?
Do you like scroggin?
Oh, all day, every day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Anyone else do anything?
I like snorkeling.
Snorkeling. Excellent. Very good. Where do you do that?
Name it.
Yeah? Victoria?
Yeah. Swimming, snorkeling.
Yeah, okay.
A little bit of scuba stuff.
Scuba. All right, very good. I don't do any water stuff, but that's cool. And that's good. So that's quite a spread of interests in the room already, and that kind of reflects wilderness medicine. It's extremely broad. It's not very well defined. And I thought I would start with, I hate to say it's sounding like a medical lecture already, but start with some definitions. So what are these things? Does anyone know what wilderness medicine is? I'll give you a clue, there's no right answer. What does it mean? What are you guys here to learn about, or apparently learn about?
How to handle a situation that might come up in the wild.
In the wild, very good. Into the wild. Yeah, that's good. As opposed to expedition medicine. Is that a different thing, or is it the same?
Sounds like a Venn
More
diagram.
planned? Yeah, excellent. Venn diagram. Science respect. What about pre-hospital and retrieval? Where would that fit in your Venn diagram? Is all wilderness medicine pre-hospital?
Ooh,
And is all pre-hospital wilderness?
I would say no.
Maybe, who knows? Remote medicine, austere environment medicine, extreme medicine, which is a term that's popped up in the last few years. So all these things, I suppose, have loose associations, but are not really well defined, and they all interrelate to each other quite closely. So I'm sorry to say that a talk entitled The Basics of Wilderness Medicine doesn't really have much of a definition or an outcome. Now, you might think that's a bad thing, but it's actually a really exciting thing if you're interested in this at the moment, because it's not a well-defined, circumscribed subspecialty of medicine. It's not neurosurgery, anaesthetics, even general practice these days has curriculums and constraints. It is growing at the moment, and it's growing at the fringes of medicine. So it's actually quite an interesting thing to get a hold of. So I would encourage you to keep an open mind about what wilderness medicine is and what it's going to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time. But of course, we're doctors and we like to review evidence and write papers and publish them in the Lancet, so even wilderness medicine hasn't escaped some high impact factor journal publications. So Lancet last year came out with this article, Extreme Expedition Wilderness Medicine. And in the sense of this discussion, it was kind of useful because it defined some of these terms. Take this if you like, if you prefer. I prefer not to really define extreme medicine, but they define it as medicine or research practice in a challenging or hostile environment, as opposed to expedition medicine, which is in preparation for or during a journey of purpose, being an expedition, often in a remote setting. And wilderness medicine is kind of broader again, I guess, that science, physiology or path and research related to human interaction with the natural environment. So I think for the purposes of tonight and for the purposes of your society, you're probably best to, well, which one of these would you think, what term best fits your society's interests? Pre-hospital? Probably not. Austere medicine, maybe sometimes. I don't know. I would say wilderness medicine is probably the, judging from who's in the room and what you've said so far, you like a bit of skiing, you like a bit of snorkeling, you like, it's quite a broad group of interests, but they all have an element of interacting with the natural environment. So I think you've chosen a good title for your group, the Wilderness Medicine Society. Good work. The Lancet approves. So what are we talking about though? I've said that I don't really want to constrain this definition by too many by over-defining it. But there are already some fairly well established subspecialties of this thing called wilderness medicine. So can anyone think of any?
Dive medicine.
Dive medicine, cool, yep.
Alpine medicine.
Yep, alpine medicine or altitude medicine. And again, it's sort of semantics, what label you put on these things, because some of them will have some crossover. But you can see from this list that I just wrote off the top of my head that there is quite an enormous group of fringe areas of medicine that all congregate under this banner of wilderness medicine. So, horses for courses is something for everyone here. How's it different to hospital work? Actually, I only just realised, can I turn that front light off? Yeah. Better for some of the photos. Cool, thanks man. Right, so how's this different to hospital work? You're already, most of you are second year med students, is that right? First year, second year? Okay, right. Your lives are about to exist predominantly in the hospital for the foreseeable decade. I'm sorry. It's a reality and it's just part of the journey. But I think wilderness medicine provides a lot of counterbalance to that. So I'm not saying that hospital medicine is bad in some way. I really like it, but I also like getting outdoors, and I think it provides a lot of balance to a well-rounded doctor. So I just wanted to highlight some of the differences between the box that you are being put in at the moment and will grow in the next decade, and medicine in the outdoors. So one difference is that logistics often outweigh the clinical aspects. If you think back to that list, there are a lot of high-end, complex areas of research and practice in some of those subspecialties, but for the most part, you're not really doing brain surgery on the side of a mountain, right? And furthermore, even if you could, that's not what's going to save your life on the side of a mountain. What's going to save your life is getting off and then getting to definitive medical care. So a lot of the challenges are actually practical and logistical rather than necessarily the complexities behind what's going on medically. So obviously the environmental elements, that's why we're there, to be there. You have limited resources, and improvisation is a big component in wilderness medicine. It maintains a breadth of practice. So I'm an anaesthetic registrar and already losing my general knowledge of medicine more broadly by the day, happily in some sense. But that makes me a worse wilderness medicine doctor, because anything can come up, whether you're scuba diving, if you're in the ocean, on a lake, or on a mountain, wherever it is. You really need skills from general practice, from emergency, in some cases from surgery, from anaesthetics, from all different fields of medicine. There is always a potential danger to rescuers as opposed to just victims themselves. I'll leave that for the moment, that's a big topic. There's potential impact on local populations. Now that's not just a negative impact that you're having as a traveller, but potential positive impact. So you can bring your highly trained, developed world knowledge in medicine to anywhere in the world, and both treat and educate local people and leave a more positive impression than when you had. And it's really way more fun. So in thinking about how to do this talk, I didn't really want to just talk about myself, but I'm going to, because it's what I know. And also I thought when I was in your shoes, the reason I was reluctant to do this was I'm not a world expert in wilderness medicine or anything even close to that. But when we started the society, I just wanted someone to tell me what cool stuff they were doing and what they were interested in. And I didn't really know what the pathway was from where I was sitting to what I wanted to be. So I'm just going to share with you some of my journey, I guess, from where you're sitting now to where I am now, which is not that much further ahead. But I'll just go through sort of chronologically what I've done. So what I've tried to keep in mind, I'm getting a bit more philosophical in my old age, is that it really is about the journey, not the end point. And I think you have to have that approach to medicine in order to survive psychologically, but also in wilderness medicine. So I don't know if I'm going to end up being an expedition doctor, expert of some sort, but I know that I will like the journey of trying to become one either way. So Shenard's quote's really cool. He says, it's kind of like the quest for the Holy Grail. You know, who gives a shit what the Holy Grail is? The quest is what's important. So when I was in med school, I felt that I was entering this production line and stayed on it. And it's a good production line, but it is definitely a factory of some sort. I started a society with a mate of mine, just like you guys. I chose to do my medical electives in South Africa, which was epic and really good. And I did one in Chile as well in anaesthetics, which was great. My mate and I, who I started the society with, did a run across the Atacama Desert and raised some money, which was cool. Felt that we were doing something different other than just reading textbooks. And I developed a rather consuming taste for climbing. I'm just going to intersperse this with some photos because I like photos of mountains. So that's Mount Aspiring in New Zealand. That's the first thing that my mate and I climbed, and that's the northwest ridge of Aspiring on the left-hand side. New Zealand's awesome. When I was a couple of years ahead of you, I got a job down here, so I moved down from Sydney. I did med school in Sydney and then started an internship here. So I moved down, did the intern thing, which was okay, and I managed to somehow wangle conference leave for an expedition medicine course in Tasmania, which was awesome. So for 1 week, went to Tassie and we camped out in the middle of the bush and did some practical wilderness medicine stuff. Lots of scenarios, like tents on fire and all this kind of stuff. It was really, really cool. And I think it was, I can't remember everything that I learned on that course, but I think motivationally it was really cool because it showed me that there was this life outside of the box, being the hospital. In second year, I found my way onto a trip across the Simpson Desert for a week, a self-supported crossing of that, and sort of played doctor for that, I guess. I did a bit of study in the background in some international health, which was something different. And I took, I should say locum, not locus. Yeah, could be worse. I took opportunities to do some diverse locum roles as well, once I felt that I got the experience. So this is the view, this is in the French Alps, this is the view from the summit of Mont Blanc looking down, firstly on Mont Maudit and then the Aiguille de Midi on the left. It's probably one of the most beautiful places in the world. As a registrar, growing up medically, last year my wife and I did a diploma in mountain medicine in Nepal. Use that as a reason to pursue further study. I'm doing a fellowship with the Wilderness Medicine Society. I've joined the Medical Commission. I do a little bit of search and rescue, done some avalanche training, and started to collect some more hobbies to combine with mountaineering. This is looking up the Middle-Eggy Ridge of the Eiger at sunset. It's the best sunset I've ever had in my life. And what I hope to do next is first finish anaesthetic training and maintain this wilderness and expedition medicine thing on the side in whatever form that takes. I have no idea. I'd like to do some more retrieval. In terms of climbing, I'd like to do a bit more technical alpine climbing and maybe do some high altitude research or work there. I'm not generally interested in research myself, I have to say, but not research for research's sake anyway. If I was going to spend time doing anything, it would be in high altitude and sharing the mountains with family and friends. This is the Jungfrau in the Swiss Alps, named after a beautiful young woman. I can skip that, that's fine. So I'm just going to tell you about a trip that I did last year to Manaslu. Does anyone know where Manaslu is or what it is? Anyone heard of it? I hadn't really either. Unless you're a climber or a mad Nepal fan, you probably wouldn't have. Sorry? Right. So this is Manaslu here. It's located pretty much smack in the middle of Nepal in the Himalaya. It's a very, very big mountain. It's 8,100 and something metres, which makes it, I think it's the 8th highest in the world. It's seriously cold. It's achievable in terms of 8,000 metre mountain climbing. It's not the hardest, it's not the easiest, but it is, on the lower end. I took 6 months off training last year to go and spend some time in the Himalaya. And climbing this was part of that. Has anyone been to Nepal? Where did you all go? Did you do the circuit?
Yeah.
Excellent. What was the best part of the circuit?
But when you come down from the pass,
Yeah, throwing la.
that area there.
Mm-hmm. Anyone been anywhere else in Nepal? Anyone been to base camp?
Yeah, I did like Everest region and went like
Yeah.
sort of did a loop.
Did you do the 3 passes trek?
We did we just went like Namcha Bazaar and then went up to like Gokyo Reef.
Yeah.
And then over and like quickly did go up to the base camp. But it was winter, their winter, so like nothing was there.
Winter.
Yeah, it was their winter.
Hey, you are.
But there's no
bold.
there's no weather like in their winter, but like that, like low.
Yeah,
So, like,
it's a stable
it's cold,
weather,
it is cold.
but bloody cold. What did you sleep in? Did you have a good bag or tents? Tea houses or tents? Wow.
See, I was a lot of clothes in winter.
Oh right.
Well, most of the clothes.
Excellent. That's pretty hardcore. Anyone else? Okay, so Nepal's a beautiful country and something. The Himalaya is something that everyone should see in their lifetime. It's amazing. So this is Manaslu. Just a few figures. So most of these mountains have a town attached to them, a local town, and for Everest it'd be what's it called, Gorakshep, or something like that. It's sort of a base town that's close to base camp. It's the highest point that you can access with fresh food and things like that. So for Manaslu, the town's called Samagan. It's at 3,500 metres. Base camp sits at 4,900, which is about 500 metres below Everest base camp. And then there are traditionally 4 camps on the mountain on the way up, with the summit being 8,163. I saw someone else talk about a climb like this, and I thought it worked quite well. So this is a timeline of what I did basically. So on the bottom row is days, so it was about 4 weeks in total. The y-axis is altitude, and down the bottom here, maybe I'll point it up here. So down the bottom, this is Kathmandu. So a couple of days in Kathmandu, then we flew up to Samagan, tried to go up to base camp on an acclimatisation hike, came back down and slept at Samagan again, so we had about 3 days there. Went up to base camp for 1 day. Here I got quite sick, not from altitude, but I got a chest infection, which was not much fun. So at this point, people were already starting to go up the mountain. We realised that we had a definite endpoint at the end, so getting sick here and then coming back down to Samagan again and resting 10 days into the expedition, and I was still at the town, not even at base camp, which was disappointing, but a really valuable lesson learned, because in the end everything worked out okay. But here I wanted to obviously keep making progress up and acclimatise and everything like that, but it was a really good strategic move to come back down to where there was relatively more oxygen, let the body heal, and then go back up. And another way of thinking about it is that you have no real option but to do that otherwise. There were other people on the mountain that didn't do that, that got sick and kept going, and that never, ever, ever ends well. So I can thank my wife for being more level-headed than me, because it was an excellent strategic move. So you can see the way that you climb a mountain at high altitude is you basically go up, you come down, you go further up, you come down, you go further up, you come down. There's a number of different strategies for acclimatization, and different people will tell you different things. Some of it's got good evidence for it, one strategy, most of it's totally anecdotal, but everyone's different as well. So I found that I was happy to, having never climbed something this high before, just see how it went, and just trust that I would know myself and be acutely aware of signs of altitude sickness, and thirdly and most importantly, be prepared to turn around, that I didn't follow a prescribed schedule. I just went up. If I felt good, I kept going. If I didn't, I turned around. So it was relatively unplanned, but essentially followed this up, down, up, down, up, down, higher and higher and higher, and along these points making camps. So that's the other thing to factor into strategy for climbing a mountain like this, is that are you going to go with a guide, or are you going to go independently? Are you going to have a Sherpa, or are you going to carry your own shit? Are you going to have oxygen, or are you going to try and climb without? All these sort of little decisions. There's many, many, many different ways to skin a cat, and people will tell you that their way is the only way to climb a mountain, but really, as long as you come to your own decision about how you're going to do these things, and you're happy with that, that's fine, just stick to it. So for me, I was carrying my own stuff, so a lot of this going up and coming down is load carrying, so carrying tents and food and caching gear up to a higher point, leaving it there, coming down, recovering again, acclimatizing, and then going up and having gear up there already. So what are some of the things that you have to, what are the competing priorities in getting up a mountain like that, do you think? You've got a finite amount of, well, it's really an oxygen economy. So you've got a finite amount of oxygen available. And what are you using oxygen for over this 4 weeks? What's that work going towards? You can think your body's just like a car and you're pouring petrol in, but you've only got so much petrol. Where's that petrol going? What's the car being used for on a mountain?
Gaining some gravitational potential energy.
Excellent. Yep, exactly right. Have you done physics before?
High school.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's a really good way to think about it. So, yep, so work, so putting work in, as in physical work, will cost oxygen and glucose and all the other things. But think about it just in terms of oxygen. So getting yourself higher will, what do you take with you when you go higher? You take gear. So climbing from camp 2 to camp 3 without a tent, without food, just yourself, is way easier than climbing with 3 days worth of supplies. So what else does oxygen go towards?
Heat.
Heat, yep, keeping you warm. So how might you obviate some of that cost?
Wear warm things.
Wear warm things, yep. No, it's so simple, but that is 100% true. Having the right gear and staying warm, because if you don't, it'll cost you oxygen. What else?
Recovery.
Recovery, very good. So glad someone said that. So recovery is a massive, massive factor. Massive factor. Anyone that has done any serious sport before knows that it's not the actual training that makes you faster or stronger, it's the recovery afterwards that does. And that's what's consuming your oxygen on a mountain. So these periods of coming down, why do you bother coming down? You've already made the height getting up. Why do you go down again? Surely it would be more efficient. You're doing less gravitational work if you just make one long ant line all the way up the mountain. Why do you come down again? Exactly, because there's more oxygen low down, you can recover, and then you can have a better tilt at what's higher up with what you've left up there. So just a little bit of strategy for altitude climbing, and these things change if you are in a team or by yourself, whether you have oxygen or whether you don't, but basically you spend the whole time, I think it's important to think about it in terms of an oxygen economy, and everything costs you oxygen. Making breakfast costs you oxygen, setting up a tent costs you oxygen, making a wrong decision, getting caught out in a storm costs you oxygen. And every time you waste that money, the bank is getting lower and lower and lower. So it's a game of strategy. The rest is pretty much just some photos. So these are some of the low camps. That's my wife looking nice and warm on the left. On the right, that's at base camp in the bottom right. So that's the tent that we lived in for the best part of 4 weeks. Top right is some supplies in a little tent higher up. And on the left, that's the tent that we carried to higher camps. You can see it's a lot smaller, it's a lot lighter. There's not much stuff. So again, there's that interesting trade-off. Do you want a bigger tent? Well, what does a bigger tent offer you? More space. You can put in more stuff, it's more comfortable. Maybe you can cook in it, maybe you can get changed in it. There's lots of positives, but what's the cost? You might, you got to carry another ½ kilo, and you have to carry that ½ kilo a whole lot higher. So it's a constant trade-off. This is late afternoon at Camp 1 at about 5,500 metres. And there was some of just the best sunrises, sunsets, still air. When the weather was good, it was unbelievably beautiful. This is quite a funny photo. That's me on the right. That's not me on the left. That's a Sherpa. this guy's client was an interesting character, and this little guy called Jungbu, the picture's not very good actually because he looks the same height as me, but he's actually up to about my nipples and I'm not very tall. So he's a very little man. His pack weighed over 50% of his body weight. My pack, the little one on the right, weighed maybe, I don't know, 15% of my body weight, tops. So Jungbu was carrying not only his stuff and all his client's stuff and all the extra stuff his client wanted to take as well. So he was doing, in terms of your gravitational work, I don't know, probably twice the work that I was by the time you factor in efficiencies of carrying those packs and things like that. So the Sherpa are, if he was carrying what I was carrying, he would have just made it look easy. So this is a pitch buckle. Hello.
Hi.
May I introduce Andrew Buckle, a gastro-reg down here, who was part of the original starting group of the Sydney Uni Wilderness Medicine Society. So, I'm just talking about Manaslu. We've talked a little bit about what I think wilderness medicine is, and now just talking about Manaslu, just showing photos. So I'll just go back and just go to those photos quickly for Buckle again. So that's Manaslu, right? That's that's base camp on the left. That's the camp altitude. So that's the puja on the bottom right. That's the profile. You might be interested in that. That's Jacinta on the left, camp 1, a little tent. That's base camp tent on the bottom right, and that's some stuff on the top right.
So how long did you spend at each level? So that's it. So
Days on the x-axis and altitude on the
so
y-axis.
2 days.
Depends. There wasn't a set rule, and it depended on a few other things. But,
Okay, yeah.
but these guys are all across the factors involved in
Oh, yeah,
how long you stay away. And then just, yeah, beautiful scenery, that kind of stuff. All right, so this is one of the pictures in the icefall. So Manaslu is a little bit like Everest in that it has an icefall down the front. So climbing's a little bit more difficult there because it's not, you know, these tumbling blocks of ice, they form interesting shapes. It's not just, most of the climbing, to be honest, on the mountain was walking up a snow slope, but the icefall was a bit more interesting with a few technical pitches in it, some steep pitches in it. Most of it had fixed ropes, so you can see on the bottom right just some white string coming down. So in Nepal, if anyone wants me to move on at any point, tell me because I'm about to go on a tangent. So there's different styles of climbing, right? This is called expedition style climbing. In expedition style climbing, you have fixed ropes. So that means someone hammers some pegs in and puts some fairy floss between them, and you clip in a carabiner onto your harness and you walk along the fixed rope. So if you fall, hopefully whatever the rope is attached to will stop you. That's as opposed to alpine style climbing, where if you and I go climbing, we rope to each other and we put our own protection in as we go, and we leave nothing on the mountain. So they both have their pros and cons. I think I much prefer alpine climbing. It's cleaner, it's more elegant, it's, you know, more efficient in many ways. But this is the predominant style of climbing in the Himalaya. It's the way that it's been climbed since the 50s, or since before the 50s actually, because at altitude you have less ability to carry ropes and gear and put your own stuff in and take it out and bring it with you as you would with alpine climbing. So a lot of the route had these fixed ropes on them. Now, if you do fixed rope climbing in somewhere like New Zealand, the protection will be bomb-proof. It'll be, you could hang a truck off that rope and it's not going anywhere. I wish I had more photos. I should have put in some photos of the pro that was holding these ropes up. These ropes came from Korea. They were about 7 mil. They were plastic. That's 2 ropes because one of them snapped. One day we came through the ice fall here, not here, a little bit further up, and there'd been an avalanche the previous night, so the rope was just strung up between seracs. So if the ice moves, the protection moves as well. So, like, it's kind of on the surface, it's a safe way to climb because you think, well, the ropes are there, I'm just going to clip into it. But to be honest, you have to make judgment calls as to when you think it's safe to use the rope and not. So often, there were many times when I would choose not to clip into the rope because it's safer to just walk and trust my feet rather than take a different route using some rope that is super sketchy. So sometimes the rope's good, sometimes the rope's not. And if someone else has put it in and it's not very good kit, you kind of have to, you still have to take ultimate responsibility for your own safety and not rely on them. Another beautiful pitch in the ice fall. The ice just made really amazing patterns and shapes and colours, and it was awesome. This little crevasse. So this is about Camp 2. Base camp that we have photos of before is down behind these guys. And the next one is a video. I hope it comes up. It may or may not, but no, we'll have to skip that. I grew a mad beard for a month. It was awesome. And so making the way up and down, up and down, up and down. Eventually, the higher camps were more intense. So they were more beautiful, they were colder, there were less people. And these photos are taken from Camp 4, which is about 7.5. On the left, right underneath the writing, that's the summit of Manaslu. And those tents down the bottom are what was Camp 4 at the time. So when I got up there were only about 11 of us, some of which are in the selfie up the top. And it was a really interesting mix. So if you, I was talking before about different styles of climbing, like there are independent climbers, there are people who have Sherpas and clients, there are groups that are organised by companies that have, maybe 5 or 6 clients with them. Anyone can go and climb a mountain if you have a permit. So there's all these different types of people with different agendas on the hill. So when I got up that night, it was really interesting. The guy on the left and I were independents. There were two, the two in the middle are a Sherpa client combo, and the other 2 were fixing Sherpa for a company. So that company had clients coming up the next day, so they send their Sherpa up the day before to put the rope up. Now, can we use that rope or can we not? Like, there's all these sort of dilemmas that come up, but the general rule of thumb was that anyone can clip into a rope on the mountain, as we said before, taking your own risks and assessing that rope and level of safety for yourself. But you could argue that people like me were freeloading off some of the work that these guys had done if I clipped into their rope. So if you were a true purist, you'd probably carry your own stuff and put it in, but there's no way I could have done that. The guy to the right of me is a guide from Peru. He was climbing independently, just by himself, and he was super strong, super strong, and ended up carrying up ladders and things for the Sherpa with him. I met him on like the second day of the expedition, and he's like, oh yeah, and got chatting, and oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, I'm here to help the Sherpa. And I was like, here to help the Sherpa? Like, who do you think you are? It's not, like, people don't come from outside and think that they're going to help the Sherpa, but sure enough, this guy did. He was super strong and had everyone's respect. So this is the view from Camp 4 up to the summit. And then, yeah, Camp 4 was just an amazing night. Never seen anything like it. So you can really, like, seriously see the curvature of the Earth from that altitude. The sunset was ridiculous, and it was like a beach ball. So summit day was a long day. I don't have a lot of photos for obvious reasons, but this is one of them. So you can see here's our friend Victor again, just plugging out steps, no oxygen, climbing himself, cranking. The guy behind him, you can see has oxygen. There are some people without, there's some Sherpas, there's some clients. It's often hard to tell who's who and who's doing what. This group was quite good because the fact that there was only a few of us there the night before meant that we could all meet each other, we could all talk, we could all plan the next day together. So it was actually although it was a miscellaneous mix of people, it was actually quite well organised, and we were all just stoked to be there. So there wasn't any sort of my team or your team or Sherpa or climber, or it was all just, it was a real privilege to be a part of in that respect. But on lots of occasions, I think in other circumstances, you have to be, there is a bit more kind of my resources are my resources, yours are yours, and that can develop, I've heard, a bit of conflict between other people on a mountain, and often the most dangerous thing in these situations, in fact, is other climbers. So I was lucky. On my summit day, everyone was really cool. The Sherpas that were there were phenomenal. The clients were all nice, and the freeloaders, we pulled our weight, I guess, in some sense. We carried some stuff. So it turned out to be a really good mix in this circumstance, but that's not always the case. This is leading up towards the summit. That's Victor again. You can see the Sherpas have put in the fixed line almost all the way. It's been pretty tight at this point. Some of the snow conditions, it's really interesting, like the snow makes lots of different types of snow, lots of different types of ice that I hadn't really appreciated before.
What did it sound like then? What was the noises up there?
Stepping on it or
Yeah, like
up
just
there?
all the, like, what did you hear in general? Like, was it really quiet? Was
Wind.
it just hearing your own
Just
breath
wind.
and your own heartbeat?
Wind until you got into a lee slope, so until you sort of tucked in behind a like a cliff or something. If you got out of the wind, it was silent, dead
Yeah.
silent, except for your own breathing,
Yeah.
which is cranking along at a ridiculous rate. Yeah, you hear your breathing, you hear your own thoughts, you hear other people saying things,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's largely very quiet out of the wind. But when you're exposed, all you hear is wind. It's super, super, super loud.
And can you communicate then? Like, can you hear each other?
So our day was relatively still, so yes, we could. That was fine. We were really lucky with the weather on summit day. And we did require a lot of communication because we were the first group up, and the ropes were being fixed as we went.
Yeah.
That also, there wasn't enough rope to fix the whole route, so there had to be some decisions made about what parts would be fixed and what parts wouldn't. After they were fixed, people climbed, and then the rope would be pulled up. So there was one situation right about here actually, where we were probably only 100 vertical meters from the summit, and there was this one guy and his Sherpa that were just super slow, which is fine. I'm not having a go at him, but because we were climbing, everyone was sort of climbing at a similar sort of pace, and we ran out of rope. Everyone had been sitting. We'd been sitting at 8,000 meters for about 20 minutes. Some of us without oxygen. That's not good. That's potentially brain time. It's actually dangerous to stop. And so there was some discussion about. Eventually, someone cut the rope and pulled it up. And said, "You've got to be up. You've got 5 minutes to get up. Otherwise, the whole group is, we're going to cut the rope." So, not cut the rope on him, but drop him off. He was going to be asked to turn around for the safety of the other 10 people that were there. Is that right? I don't know. I wasn't involved in, that was the fixing Sherpa making those decisions, but it's just really interesting stuff to think about, that it's not just a matter of wait a little bit longer and let him catch up, because you're waiting in a very, very dangerous place. So so there was able to be communication on that day, but as I said, we're really lucky with the weather, so it's fine.
So they did turn around.
No, he hurried up. And he got up. Yeah.
Did you have any plans, like cut-off times that you were like, if we don't reach it by this time, we'll turn around?
Yeah, so I did. So I was climbing myself. So we all had, we all met and talked the night before, but I was making my own decisions pretty much. So I had a cut-off time for myself that if I'm not on the summit by this time, I'm turning around. And you have to do that. And that's, you see that in the movies and in books and all that kind of stuff, and it sounds a bit cliche, but it is really like a really good safety benchmark for yourself. I would like to think that I'm the kind of climber that knows how to turn around when I need to, but I also know that when you're hypoxic, exhausted, and you're 50 metres from a summit.
And a Y chromosome.
And a Y chromosome. Not exactly. You may not have the cognitive capacity to make that decision.
Were you lucky
Let
with
alone
your
the.
wife? Like, did you have someone who was looking out for physical and mental symptoms?
So she unfortunately got quite sick at Camp 1. No matter how many times she tried to go up, seemed to be okay at base camp at 4,900, but 5,500 Camp 1 got quite sick on one. Ultimately, we had a pretty rough night with her vomiting most of the night and super weak. And I had to get some oxygen from one of the other teams, and then we took her down first thing in the morning, and that was sort of game over. So no, she didn't get above Camp 1.
Were you worried then climbing by yourself that you didn't have someone who had your back at 8,000 metres?
Yes. 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 I guess you just have to, my counter argument to that, to myself anyway, was that I would really lower my threshold to bail out if I needed to. So as soon as I felt that things were getting dodgy, I was going to turn around straight away. And luckily, it all just went like peaches and cream, and it was, well, not, you know, it was really hard, but I never got sick. So, yeah, I guess it was a gamble in some sense, but I felt that I was able to mitigate some of those risks, both in, I'd met some of these other people by this point over the previous weeks. So, for example, Victor, that Peruvian guy, I knew and I trusted. And so if he had said to me, "You look like shit, you need to go down," I would have turned around. So
You really would have though?
I would like to think I would have.
Yeah.
I've turned around on climbs that I've really wanted before, and I think that's probably, again, I still have a Y chromosome, so maybe I don't, but I think the day that you lose the ability to, or the willingness to do that, is probably the day I should not climb anymore. Yeah, but yes, it was probably, it's not the safest way to do it, climbing by yourself. Yeah. You had a question?
I was going to say, can we sidebar for 60 seconds and talk the physiology of what actually causes altitude sickness?
Yeah, okay. So, it's a big question. So,
59 seconds again.
So I would say try and separate altitude illness from altitude exposure and acclimatization. A totally normal, healthy person will have problems, physiological problems. If I dropped you out of a helicopter at 6,000 metres, you would have physiological problems. Altitude illness is slightly different. It's the same things that cause those illnesses, but it's a defined set of pathologies. So acute mountain sickness is the major one and the first one you should learn about, and then the progression or separate development of either HACE or HAPE. Have you heard of these things, these new terms?
Yeah.
Okay, so high altitude cerebral edema and high altitude pulmonary edema. They're the two major things that will kill someone. There are a number of other things, but classically the altitude illness box consists of AMS, acute mountain sickness, and then the more serious and fatal conditions of HACE and HAPE. Now, you can be a totally healthy person, but you'll still struggle if you acutely are exposed to hypoxic conditions. So altitude is, why is there less oxygen at altitude? Yes, so it's not that, it's, what's the fraction of oxygen at altitude? What's the fraction of oxygen at sea level? What are we breathing now? What percentage? 21. What are we breathing there? 21. Yeah, it's just that the total barometric pressure is lower. So the amount of oxygen molecules, the proportion of oxygen molecules are the same, but the amount of oxygen molecules that are driven down a pressure gradient ultimately to your cells that are doing work is lower. So you have less oxygen to play with. Now, there's a number of ways to get around that. One is so the main problem is hypobaric hypoxia, low pressure hypoxia. Hypobaric hypoxia, that's the driving force underneath altitude and exposure altitude. How could we get more oxygen? We could put a mask on. How else could we get more oxygen? What would happen if I dropped you out of a helicopter? What would you do?
Breathe quicker.
You'd breathe quicker. You'd hyperventilate. Excellent.
Or condition yourself.
Sorry?
Or condition yourself.
Yeah, excellent. So we'll put that aside for a second because that's the important next step. But you would hyperventilate. Why can't you just hyperventilate more and more and more and more? If you could just breathe at 5 times the rate that you are now, you could suck in enough oxygen to get by. But why can't you just keep doing that?
You'd have respiratory alkalosis.
Yes.
What for your C2.
Excellent. So now you've generated a second problem. You may have solved the first, but now of hypoxia, but now you've got a pH problem, which is also poorly tolerated by the body. So respiratory, this is the key to acute altitude exposure and acclimatization, that the respiratory alkalosis that is generated, so you start with hyperbaric hypoxia, not enough oxygen, you hyperventilate as a response to that. Respiratory alkalosis, because of that, that's now a new problem, which feeds back negatively to the first one, so you breathe slower because you're alkalotic. So the respiratory alkalosis puts the brakes on hyperventilation. If we could just keep hyperventilating, we would not be hypoxic, but we can't because the alkalosis pulls us back. So acclimatization is about taking those brakes off. So there's a few components of acclimatization. We might leave that for another talk. I'll do a proper talk later on altitude illness and stuff because there's a lot to it and it's really interesting. But that's the basics of it, that you've got a competing physiological priorities between hypoxia and pH imbalance, and acclimatization is part of correcting that balance and allowing you to breathe faster. And I might leave it there because there's a number of ways that we do that. It's a whole talk in itself. But yeah, it's basically, it's the driving force is hypobaric hypoxia. And everything you do physiologically and strategically is about getting around that problem. That's a summit selfie.
How did you go with like dehydration and that kind of thing?
Yeah, excellent. So that's another factor.
It was always like when you're dehydration, it was
Made things worse.
Yeah,
in terms of altitude. It can do, yeah. There's some really interesting studies on fluid state and propensity towards acute mountain sickness. We'll talk about that next time, maybe, with the altitude talk. But I guess that's one thing to consider is does fluid volume and osmolality and everything that goes with fluid in the body, does that stuff impact AMS and the development of HACE and HAPE? But as a separate problem, why do you need fluid up here? You need fluid when you go for a run around the park, right? So for the same reasons you're going to need fluid when you carry a pack up a hill, but also you're breathing a whole lot faster. So what does that do? You're going to lose a lot of water because you're hyperventilating and the air is really cold and really dry. Okay, so your body's doing a lot of work to humidify that air as it goes in. So you lose in theory, you lose a lot of water, but again, it's a little bit more complex, so we might talk about that next time too. But yeah, fluid is another factor in this competing priorities economy of climbing a mountain. Like, fluid costs you oxygen, but you need fluid. How much do you take? You've got an infinite, well, not an infinite, but you've got an absolute shit ton of fluid sitting on the side of the hill, don't you? Can you use that?
No.
Why not?
Well, not really, unless you're going to melt it with your gas that you've carried up.
Yes, excellent, good. So what's the problem with that?
Then you have to carry more gas.
You do, great. So fluid costs you gas and gas costs you oxygen. Good. So you got to think about how you're going to take it. Or are you better to just carry 2 litres of water? Probably not. You're probably better to carry a couple hundred grams of gas in the stove. But then you have to have the time of boiling it and all this kind of stuff. So it's all this like constant weighing of priorities.
How do you carry water without it freezing anyway?
Good question. Yeah. Some people use bladders inside their down.
Okay.
I prefer to bottle. I didn't really like the hose. I found like on other climbs I've done, the hose is freezed and then you've stuffed. Then you
next to your face.
Sorry?
And then you've got that stuck down your shirt.
Well, yeah,
frozen hose.
and then you're carrying 2 kilos of dead weight as well that you can't use. It's like you're worse than carrying nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just carried a Nalgene bottle. Everyone knows what that is. It's just like a big 1 litre wide mouth thing. Kept it in. There's a big pocket inside that jacket. Plenty of space. The jacket's like huge. So yes, there's a big pocket that sits inside and keeps it warm and melted. But you have to boil that up at the start of the day. Yeah, so that's on the summit. Ussie on the summit, and that was that. So it was primarily a climbing trip. I'm not going to lie. I didn't go there to be a doctor. I went there to do what I wanted to do. But when you go to these places with medical knowledge, you cannot escape medicine, and it will creep in. And sometimes, usually, that's a good thing. So. Turns out my wife and I there were a few doctors in base camp. There were probably 200 people trying to climb the mountain that season. So a reasonable population of people. And if you put that many people in one place and sit them there for a month doing nothing, you're going to have problems evolving anyway. And when you add into that people, with Y chromosomes trying to do things that are quite difficult, people get sick and accidents happen and that kind of stuff. But what we saw, this is a brief breakdown of what I could remember us dealing with during the month. So most of it was GP stuff. Most of it was gastro in particular in camp, from poor water hygiene, people not washing their hands. Really, really, really easy to get sick. Your immune function is also slightly compromised at that altitude, so your propensity to get gastro or upper respiratory tract infections and things like that is increased. So saw a few urties, saw lots and lots of blisters from people that weren't taking care of their feet, and in some cases that's a trip ender. You can be undone by a blister. That would be a real shame. We saw the full gamut of altitude illness, from mild AMS to severe AMS, which is where I would put Jacinta, and then saw some HAPE and HACE. This guy on the right, I wish I'd taken a photo of his foot. He's the chronic foot ulcer. So this is, he's also the guy on the summit. We stood on the summit together, but he climbed the summit with 1.5 feet. So on a previous 8,000 metres, this guy's trying to climb all 8,000 metres with no oxygen or something like that. And on a previous trip, he'd got so severe frostbite that he'd lost all his toes on 1 foot and had a 4-foot amputation. So he had not quite a stump, but kind of a orange on the end of a stump kind of foot. He'd made some sort of prosthesis to fit into his climbing boot that he could strap up and continue, his climbing career. So this guy was going up and down the mountain on this stump with a prosthesis in his climbing boot in the cold, and he had this chronic breakdown of his surgical wound from the 4-foot amputation closure. So this is about 3 weeks into the trip. You can't tell a guy like this to not climb. He comes like, oh, hey doctor, can you look at my foot? And I'm like, sure, no worries. I look, I was like, that is really bad, you're gonna get infected, like you're gonna get osteomyelitis, but he's still going up. So all he wanted me to do was patch up his foot in a way that would be better to climb. So I put him on some antibiotics. I gave him a bit of a debridement as best I could in his tent, which is there, using some saline that I found from someone else, some betadine that I had in a medical kit, and I threw in a couple of loose sutures just to hold the skin together with enough space to drain if anything did collect. It's not good medical practice, but it was a practical solution for him not to bleed into his boot. And anyway, he promised me he'd see his surgeon when he got home, but I don't know if he would have. So I stitched him up with, had a multi-tool, and a stitch and some betadine and informed consent about the risks of what we were doing. Saw some frostbite as well, and unfortunately had 1 death, which I might briefly tell you about, but it's a long story, so I might not say too much about it. So there were two guys that got into trouble from our camp. Both were very experienced climbers. Both had climbed Everest before. Both had climbed other 8,000 metre peaks before. One was French, one was Austrian. They were both middle-aged men in their early 40s with kids and jobs and lives. And they were both really nice. We had dinner with them most nights at base camp. They were sensible, they were strong climbers, they knew what they were doing. I asked both of them for lots of advice because this was my first big peak and they gave great, advice. These were not people that didn't know what they were doing. They were just people with Y chromosomes. They got respiratory tract infections about halfway through, started coughing up some gunk. Jacinta and I told them to slow down, gave them some antibiotics. They did not slow down. They sometimes took the antibiotics. They carried on. You can see where this is going. They got into a lot of trouble. They summited quite late in the afternoon, the day after I did. I crossed them as I was coming down between Camp 4 and Camp 3. It's pretty knackered. They were coming up. They both looked like shit. They were not the strong climbing men that I knew. They were moving really, really slowly. They were getting passed by big groups of inexperienced people. One was hacking up a cough. He was the French guy. He admitted that he'd started coughing blood the previous day. The other guy looked a bit unsteady on his feet. I'd just come down from the summit and was knackered and in physiological danger myself. So I stayed for about 10 minutes, which was as long as I was prepared to stay, and I talked to them both, and I feel that I did everything I could to turn them around unsuccessfully. They summited late the next afternoon, and then what do you think, how can I ask this question so it's a reasonable question? Do you think it's a good idea to sleep high after a summit attempt? What would your aim be? What would your physiological aim be?
Get down to oxygen as fast as
Yes. How much oxygen?
As much as you can.
As much as you can. So, I'm not trying to say that I did everything right, but one thing I did well, I got all the way down to base camp, and it was such a long day, such a beautiful day, such a hard day, but such a long day, and I will do that again if I am ever in this situation. I will keep going downhill until I can go no further, because every bit that you descend, you are getting more oxygen to recover. Your body's just taken a huge insult. This is the other end of the spectrum. They both knew what they were doing. They wouldn't have chosen to have stayed at Camp 4, 7,500 metres, but they were physically unable to go any further after their summit. So this is a decision that should have been made hours and hours and hours earlier. They should have turned around, well, days earlier, arguably. They stayed at Camp 4 that night. We woke up to news on the radio the next morning that the Austrian guy had died in his sleep and that there was a group of Sherpas trying to get up to them at Camp 4. Again, mountain politics, if you like. Who rescues these guys? These were guys climbing independently. This would have been me if I'd gotten into trouble. Would I want a team of Sherpa to compromise their own health and safety by coming after me? I don't know, I suppose I would, but geez, you'd hope not. So you kind of, yeah, there's no right or wrong way to do these things, but one was dead, one was still alive. The Sherpa were trying to go up from Camp 2, so they climbed up, having summited the previous day, they climbed up 1,200 metres to get this French guy. How high do you think a helicopter can fly?
They struggle at Everest Base Camp, which is 5,500.
They do. So helicopter technology is getting better, pilots are getting braver, they're going higher and higher, but that's a really good benchmark and a really good rule of thumb, that Everest Base Camp is about as high as you can reliably get with a helicopter, and that's 5,500 metres. So this guy was in trouble at 7,500 metres. That's not exactly, a little bit higher. That's a lot of barometric difference. So the reason the helicopters can't fly is because there's not enough air pressure to generate force from the rotating wings. So this was apparently a really good chopper and a really ballsy pilot, an amazingly ballsy pilot, because he agreed to pick him up from Camp 3, which is 6,900 metres, and that's apparently the highest this has been flown on this mountain, and only once before in Nepal had anyone that I asked heard of it. a chopper rescue being higher. So this was not routine retrieval. This was like the pilot was gambling his life with very, very bad odds to get him. So the Sherpas got up to Camp 4, dragged this French guy down to Camp 3, 6,900. The pilot came, landed up at base camp. Jack and I had taken the medical side of things. There wasn't really a very organised rescue effort other than one of the team leaders from one of the other teams was sort of directing the Sherpa, and we just decided to sort of, no one else was going to do the medical stuff, so we would. We just prepared as much as we could at base camp, got as much equipment ready as possible. We met the pilot when he landed at base camp, and we made a plan that when he collected the French guy, that he would touch down at base camp. We would do what we could with what we had there, if we thought it appropriate, or we'd just put him in the back of the helicopter and just get out. So the pilot landed at base camp, had dumped all unnecessary fuel, had taken the doors off the helicopter, had dropped every single kilo of weight that could be dropped from the thing, flew up to 6,900 metres, picked this guy up in a state of near death, dropped him down at base camp where we were waiting. We did a quick assessment which took about 2 seconds to realise that we were not staying, we were going in the back. So I had a grab bag ready to go, jumped in the back with him, and we flew down the valley, and someone took a photo of us leaving, and that's what that photo is. So
Who foots the bill?
I don't know, not me.
Ultimate downside is that $3.5 million.
No, I do know actually. Well, yeah, I don't know who foots the bill if he crashes. I think it's bad luck to the helicopter company if he crashes. Well, it's bad luck to him and his family if he crashes, but part of the reason for the big delay, I didn't put any time frames in there, but I should. So they summit on the afternoon, they sleep at Camp 4. One guy wakes up, one guy doesn't. News goes out on the radio that 2 guys are in trouble. This is first thing in the morning, like 5 or 6 a.m. We didn't fly out from base camp until probably 2 p.m, 3 p.m, mid-afternoon. A large amount of that time was the Sherpa getting up from Camp 2 to Camp 4, which is remarkably quick, but still takes a significant amount of time. But there was a real delay on the phone to France, to the insurance company, to sign off and give us some bullshit code for the chopper to get paid. A chopper would not leave Kathmandu until they had the insurance code to pay for it, which from a business sense is fair enough, but from a rescue sense is quite frustrating. We got someone else who spoke good French to come in, and someone else who spoke German because the other guy's insurance was German, and on the phone, and at one point I was talking to a doctor in France about whether this was a serious medical condition or not. I was like, do I need to explain this to you? Like, really? So some of the delay was due to insurance, financial, money, bureaucratic stuff. So I think ultimately the helicopter bill was paid for by the French guy's insurance company.
I can tell you my brother had to get chopper backed out from Annapurna, and it's the insurance that covers it. But it was a $4,000 chopper ride each for about 20 minutes of flight.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's expensive, it's not cheap stuff. And also, I mean, I don't really know as much as I probably should about the insurance side of things with search and rescue. Rowena probably knows a lot more. But some policies will cover to a certain height, others won't cover if you have ropes and equipment involved, and all these kinds of things. And it's not so much whether or not these guys are sorted out beforehand, it's that all of this gets brought up and has to be sorted out at the time that he's actively dying. Like, stop asking these questions about, what his insurance policy covered or not. But anyway, yeah, the insurance policy ultimately covered it, and the Austrian guys, the guy who died, his insurance company covered his repatriation when he got off the mountain. So in the end, the insurance company's paid, but I guess the frustration from where we were sitting was the time that it took for that process to happen, which is something to think about in retrieval. So on that happy note, Did anyone have questions about that stuff, or more broadly what we saw medically on Manaslu?
Oh,
Yes.
just, did you plan on using the fixed ropes? 'Cause it sounds like you bummed into all these people that were doing the fixed ropes. So what was your plan prior to that?
If they didn't have any?
Yeah.
I didn't carry rope or fixed protection with me, so if there were no fixed rope, then I would have to just make a judgment of whether I thought it was safe to climb free or not. Most of the climb was not this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It wasn't like this for 4 weeks. This is really an exception.
But if you hadn't had the fixed rope, would you have gone up that stuff?
This stuff?
No, yeah.
That stuff? No, no way.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
And so were you aware that you would have been aware though that you would have hit that kind of stuff?
Yep,
So
definitely.
Did you sort of make plans to see if people hadn't made fixed lines that season and things like that, or?
So I guess on a big mountain like this, where you know there's going to be a huge volume of people there, Everest is an even more archetypal example. I knew that it was going to be a busy season on Manaslu. I knew that there would be 20 or 30 major commercial teams there, all with their own fixing Sherpa and with their own equipment. And the way that they work it out between themselves is that their Sherpas work together for the good of the population. Then there's some freeloaders, and then there is some people that bring their own stuff and do it totally themselves. So if you're going to do what we did, then you should contribute in some way, whether that's monetary wise, or so we paid like a some sort of access fee or something to the, like on Everest they call them the icefall doctors and things like that, and everyone pays a $200 or $300 fee to these guys that fix the rope for everyone that's on the mountain. So we had something similar on Manaslu, but what that meant practically was that if the ropes weren't fixed, I mean, no one's going to stop you walking up, but you're taking your own risks. So I was limited, on sections like this, I was limited by whether the ropes are being fixed or not. But there's a fair bet that the commercial companies want to get their clients up early enough. So you're going to be limited by weather. So at one point, the ropes weren't fixed high up because there were storms. But yeah, I mean, if you want to go kamikaze, you can. No one's going to stop you. But we were, on technical sections like that, definitely waited for fixed rope and assessed the quality of the fixed rope as well.
Sure.
There were a couple of times when it looked pretty crap, to be honest. So I didn't go with it.
What's ice like for rain protection?
Really good, yeah. So lots of different types of ice. But in general, ice is better than snow. So what you use in ice is called an ice screw. Have you seen that, or do you know what that is? Okay, so I'll show you a picture, but it's probably about that long. It's got a handle on it, and it's got a screw with a hollow core. So if you've got solid ice, it's got teeth that bite into the ice. So you crank it in, and then you've got that much threaded metal in the ice. So
you're not using like standard climbing like nuts?
No. So snow and ice climbing is a totally different set of pro to rock. Mixed climbing refers to both. So climbs where you might have rock sometimes and snow and ice other times. So you have to take equipment for both circumstances. But pure ice in itself can be really, really reliable. Like if you've got a good ice screw in, that's super, super strong. Snow, you can put in pickets. So I think I had, this sort of stuff, for example, a few metres ahead of the guy in the blue, there'll be a snow picket. So that's a stake about this long, which is maybe that wide, and is either a cross or a right angle in cross section, and it gets hammered into the snow and a carabiner and a rope attached to that. So if you fall, you have to set it in a certain way so it's going to load the snow right if you take weight on the rope. But it's generally pretty reliable if you put a few in. So different conditions have different equipment. Or just a couple more things with ice though. If it's soft and crumbly ice, then it's not really going to be very reliable. Conversely, if it's super hard ice, I saw ice in Nepal that I've never seen like anywhere else, and one of the Sherpas said it was like thousands of years old, this ice, like millennia old, and it was super hard, really dark, deep blue, and I couldn't get an ice screw in it. The metal would not bite. It was like concrete. And so, well, then what are you going to do? Can't use that. But yeah, the good ice is pretty reliable. Any other questions about climbing or that?
I know this isn't, that we're not really going too much into altitude.
Yeah, that's fine. No, we can if you want.
But,
No, this is fine. We can talk about that.
so obviously past a certain, what are the thresholds in terms of heights of, so past a certain height you have to stay to acclimatise, and eventuating to a certain height where it's impossible to acclimatise? Are there kind of specific altitudes?
Yep.
Where
So I guess a couple of different contexts to think about that in. One would be acute exposure. So if you're trying to climb a mountain in a season, for example, the other would be long-term adaptation to a population. So does anyone have any thoughts on what the highest human habitation is? People don't live at 7,000 metres.
Like 4,000.
Yeah, there's a few at 4,000. Whereabouts in the world is that?
Yeah, I can't.
Maybe it's really high. La Paz is the highest capital.
Excellent. Yep, La Paz is the highest capital. How high is that?
3,000.
Is it? Yeah, I don't even know. Something around 4-ish. In Nepal, in South America, they're probably the only places I can think of. There are permanent populations, so not people that just come and scientists that come for a season with bottled oxygen and this kind of stuff, but generations that have lived there. And the highest that I've read about is sort of early 5s. So early 5s is about the highest that people can, like as a species, survive at. But that has its own set of problems as well. So there's problems with the adaptations that are required to survive with that little oxygen. So blood gets really thick, the heart does funny stuff because of that. It's, yeah, there's other problems with it, chronic mountain sickness. In terms of acute exposure, everyone reacts to altitude differently. So AMS has been reported at super low altitudes. Like classically, most books that I've read have sort of said, you can think about it starting about 2,500 metres. So that's nowhere in Australia. You might get it in New Zealand, just. You'll probably get it in South America, and you'll almost certainly get it in the Himalaya.
Is that mainly just due to the oxygen supply, the low oxygen supply, or is it also just the pressures up there?
For what?
For those sort of chronic, like
the chronic
fact that you
problems?
can't be above those sort of altitudes.
Good point. I don't know. Most things I've read have talked about just the chronic hypoxia.
Yeah.
So the simplest and classic one is the polycythemia that gets is generated because of that, and then you get sort of right ventricular dysfunction, and you're pumping jelly around instead of fluid basically, and that causes all sorts of problems, clotting diseases and things like that. But I don't know about pressure in itself. Maybe. So yeah, but anything else, start thinking about acute exposure after 2.5.
Is the main issue hypoxia or high hypocapnia?
Hypoxia. Yeah. Well, hypo or hypocapnia. So hypoxia is your first problem.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Like hypocapnia from overbreathing is what I was thinking.
Okay. So there is, I don't know, but at the risk of, medicalising this topic, there is a study, a New England study, done by a bunch of UK doctors. Some of you might have seen it, where they took some gases from near the summit of Everest. So you're probably very good at interpreting ABGs. It would be an interesting exercise to look up that study and see what you think of those numbers. So what's a normal PO2 on a gas, on a room air? 100. Yeah, 100 roughly should be, ideally. The worst PO2 that was recorded out of those 4 samples at 8,500 metres was 19, which is orders of magnitude lower than any other living person. That is not a PO2 compatible with life. But apparently it is, because this guy was talking and breathing.
Because you are dying essentially above.
Yeah, I suppose,
You can't
yeah.
live at 8,000 metres.
No, you can't, yeah. But equally, you can't live at 7,000 metres. So, I don't know, I think the death zone's a bit of a
It's extreme.
media thing, you know, to, to sell books and stuff. But, yeah, I can't remember, I wish I could remember the CO2 numbers, but they're astronomically low as well. So both problems are occurring, the hypoxia we talked about, and also the pH problems that's generated trying to solve that first problem. Both, it's not like you fix one of them, or it's a balance between the two. And in that extreme example of those gases, they're both terrible. But they're both just above death. You haven't got one death and one slightly better than death. You've got, yeah, so it's interesting gases. Yeah.
If you take oxygen negative,
Yep.
how much does that help?
Heaps.
Like even with those numbers?
Heaps and heaps and heaps. So those numbers, those guys climbed with oxygen, as most people do on Everest, and then they took the oxygen off for, I can't remember, maybe 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, and then took the gases. So if you provide supplemental oxygen, you are not increasing the pressure, you're increasing the FiO2, the fraction of inspired oxygen. So you're increasing the total number of oxygen molecules without increasing the total pressure. Does that make sense? Another way to think about that problem is that it's not just about why do we breathe faster, why do we hyperventilate and become hypocapnic. It's not just because we're trying to get more oxygen in. Well, you can think of the alveolus as having a finite volume, and it's full of different types of gases. So breathing off CO2 allows more space for more oxygen. It's another alternative way of looking at the problem rather than just jamming in more oxygen. You're trying to get your PCO2 low so that you can make space for oxygen in the alveolus. Yeah.
Because of the decreased pressure in air, is atelectasis, like contraction atelectasis, a thing? Does that ever happen? Because there's less pressure in the alveoli? You know what I mean?
Don't know, not sure.
And
I don't think so, because the total atmospheric pressure is lower. So it's kind of like when you're diving.
oh, so there's less pressure outside too?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
So it's the opposite circumstance to diving.
Did you guys see many portable oxygen chambers being used?
No, but good question. And there wasn't even one at base camp. If we had one, we probably would have kept that guy there instead of helicoptering out. So does anyone know what they are?
They used inflatable.
Yes. Yeah, they're really cool. They're called a Gamov bag, invented by some crazy Russian, and they're basically a long tube, like most things in mountaineering. It's basically a long tube, a long airtight. It's made of kind of like a tarp material. It's got an airtight zip on it, and it's a tube that fits a body in it. And it also has a valve attached to a foot pump. So what you do is you put the person in, you zip them up, and you step up and down to the foot pump for as long as you can, and you can generate enough pressure inside that. Most bags that I've seen, the highest I've heard can drop about 2,000 metres or so. So in terms of because what you're trying to do is force more oxygen into your cells, yeah? You're not increasing the FiO2 necessarily. You should be putting oxygen in there too.
Yeah.
But the pressure is also working. The pressure is also ramming more oxygen down. So you should be increasing the proportion of oxygen in the air, and you should also be putting more air in total into the person. So the Gamov bags are really good. It's not something that you carry if you were a small expedition. It's just not economical not in terms of money, but in terms of everything we were talking about before. They weigh about 5 or 6 kilos. They pack down relatively small, but still sort of that big. You also have the energy cost of someone standing on the pump. It's not an automated thing. So if you put someone in there, what do you do next? Are you there all night? Yes, that happens. So there's an aid post up the valley towards Everest Base Camp where they have one, which is a really appropriate thing to have there. so that when they get people evacuated down and they can't get them further out by helicopter because it's bad weather or something, they put them in the game off bag and they put a roster for people to jump up and down on the pump all night, overnight, day in, day out, until the helicopter can come and get someone out. Because if you stop pumping and you take them out, you've instantly exposed them again back to their native altitude.
If you stop pumping, will they just suffocate? Like,
Will they suffocate?
Yeah.
If you don't unzip them, it probably will. Probably. It's pretty claustrophobic actually. I've been in one. It's just got a tiny little plastic thing. I'm not claustrophobic, but even I was like, this is a bit cramped in here. Yeah, but it's a really clever device. So in the right place in the right time, it's really, really, really cool. But not something you carry in your backpack. Yeah.
Do people ever measure their oxygen saturation? I was just curious
Yep.
as to what they...
Every doctor that goes through altitude measures their oxygen saturation.
I wish I had one, even when I was like 5,000 metres.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's probably pretty bad. But I'm not sure that it has a lot of meaning, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I took one. I took a little portable thing.
Yeah.
Everyone does. You know, you can't help it. I'm going to need to do some more of that stuff every day. I want to know what number I'm pumping up there. But I stopped looking at it after a while. It was just kind of probably inaccurate and a bit depressing.
How low did it go?
Camp 3 was the highest I used it, and it was like 65%. So that's sitting in a tent doing nothing. Then I put it on at a heart rate of about 100, which is pretty baseline at that altitude, I found. But then I put it on the Sherpa in the tent next door, and his was 63. And I was like, whoa. And he was the man. So he wasn't about to drop dead. So I don't know. I think it kind of, there's other ways that you compensate for the lack of oxygen. So yeah, it's not just about increasing your saturation. You know, you increase your heart rate, you increase your cardiac output as well. You increase the amount of hemoglobin in your blood, the total number of red cells, not just the percentage of them that are saturated with oxygen, and you increase your PaO2 as well. So the other less important aspects of oxygen content in the body become much more important in this context, and they're not what you're measuring in the SATS probe. Also, the error in the SATS probes, like they're only calibrated to be accurate from sort of 90 and above, and especially the $5 eBay ones that everyone carries with them. There's like 65. What does that mean? That's not 65. So maybe it was. I don't know. Yeah. But I think much more. I decided that I was going to go on how I felt subjectively, rather than using unreliable objective numbers like that. But I did find my heart rate was pretty good at predicting things like that. So I adjusted my expectation for what it should be at a certain altitude, and looked for changes in my heart rate. So if I felt myself getting tachycardic, that was a sign to, you know, slow down or be careful or do something. That seemed to work well. Cool. Any other questions? Rowena?
What was the device on the previous slide?
Oh, that was, okay, so that's not related to his blister. That was a training device this guy used. It's some kind of restrictive breathing training device for athletes. He was trying to, I think it's called a power breathe or something like that. They sell them to triathletes and things, and he was trying to convince me that that was the way he was going to get up the mountain. He'd been breathing on this thing on a trainer at home for months beforehand. And he was pretty strong. Maybe it works. I don't know. But it's the only photo I had of him, and I wish I'd taken one of his foot instead.
It's probably where his foot didn't heal.
Yeah, he's not very hard.
Just a quick question about how you could potentially go about funding your climbs if you're interested.
Yeah. Start saving, man.
Can you get paid as an experienced climber who's also a doctor and go with some of these guys who pay commercial companies to climb ridiculous amounts of money?
Good question. We should talk about, I've got lots and lots to say about that, more than I can answer right here, because I've been asking myself the same question since I was a med student. How can I make this happen without costing so much? yes is the simple answer. You can find yourself on a mountain like that as the doctor, but you'll be sitting at base camp while everyone else goes up and down.
Okay.
You probably also won't get paid for it. They'll probably pay your trip fare to get there. You won't be going up yourself if you, at this point in time, in the current context of what climbing is and what wilderness medicine is. That might change, you know, as wilderness medicine grows and professionalises and climbing changes, and equally as everything else changes, diving and, you know, all the other aspects of wilderness medicine. There's going to be, I suspect, more legitimate jobs in these kinds of fields, but at this point, most people can't make a full-time career out of it. Most people are other sorts of doctors who like doing this stuff. Secondly, most people don't get paid much, if anything, for it. And thirdly, even if you do get your costs covered, you'll be compromising on your flexibility of your expedition for your own sense. That said, if you want to go and be a doctor on the mountain, there are heaps of opportunities to go and work in places at base camps and at health posts and things like this, but it depends what your aim is. I decided I was really clear with myself that I wanted to prioritise climbing, so for that reason I didn't look for a job as a doctor on the mountain. All this stuff was just because we were there. It wasn't because we'd gone with a medical objective. So the answer is yes, you can, but like all things, you'll be compromising something for it. But that might change. There might be a market for some high altitude or deep sea doctors, and I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's make a market.
Take 3 months off, go climbing, get some rich guy to pay you a bunch of money. And
It would. And if you can make yourself a really rich friend,
yeah,
introduce me to him so I can make him my friend. But that would be one pathway, is finding, and I think that's probably the most likely pathway at this point in time, is find one person, and there's plenty of rich dudes that want to go and do this stuff, and you could sell yourself as a doctor, but you also need to have enough experience in whatever field you're doing, diving or whatever. But yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. If you go with a big company as a doctor, you'll be at base camp. Hopefully that changes. Excellent question. Cool. Any other questions about the Manaslu stuff? We're doing for time. It's 20 to 8. Okay. So that was probably too much about me. So I wanted to give you some ideas. This is not a prescribed set of things that I think you should do. This is just some food for thought of where you can go and how you can go about doing the wilderness medicine thing, whatever that is, in the next few years. So another good quote from an American environmentalist, Bill Tillman, in mountaineering, as in war, it seldom pays to defer a meal, even if an opportunity for eating offers. At the best, the next opportunity may be long in coming. At the worst, it may never come again. I think that's a good motto for mountaineering. It's a good motto, quite literally, for being a junior doctor. Take food when you can get it, take coffee when you can get it, take breaks when you can get it, go to the toilet when you can get it, seriously. But on a higher level, I think if you think about wilderness medicine as the meal, you should be taking every opportunity in the next decade that comes to you. Because there may not be, it may be a long time coming otherwise, and other things will probably come from it. So if you want to do it, prioritise it. Some ideas for further study. I think that experience trumps education and courses, but I've found I've done probably too many courses and not enough experience. I've just found that's fitted in around the medical thing much easier to get some qualifications and do a structured course, and you can sometimes get leave for it, and it's kind of pre-packaged, you don't have to organise stuff. So doing some courses is not a bad thing to do. There's lots of courses out there, whatever flavour of wilderness medicine you like. There's just been a course started in Australia called an Advanced Wilderness Life Support, which is an American thing. It's a 2 or 3 day program. It's kind of like an ALS or an APLS. It's another A-LS course. But this is sort of focused on how to handle a mishap in the wild, basically. it doesn't have a narrow mandate. It's meant to cover the basics of wilderness medicine as a whole. The diploma in mountain medicine is fantastic for anyone interested in altitude, and they run several of them around the world. The marine science one I don't know anything about, nor the diploma of diving and hyperbaric, but there are structured programs for people that are really water mammals. Perhaps Rowena can tell you a little bit about the space study program at the ISU. Is this something that's too early for these guys to be thinking about, do you think?
No, because there were undergraduate students who were doing it. It's a 5-week program which is run in Adelaide in January, February each year by the International Space University and the University of South Australia. And it's basically for anyone who's interested in space, so there were engineers, lawyers, business people. I was the only doctor there. And it's a mixture of lectures and workshops, and then the last couple of weeks everybody works together on a white paper project on space-related topics. So our topic was using remote sensing, so things like satellites, to look at how we could improve food and water security in the global south. So sort of really interesting, very challenging, but you certainly learn a lot out of it. And I then went on and did a graduate certificate in space studies and did an expedition medicine project, which I've just finished.
And I believe you also duxed your year, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
Yes, that little chestnut. There is now a fellowship with the Wilderness Medicine Society. If anyone's thinking about doing that, come and talk to me. I've got things to say about it. Anyone looking at an MPH, there's quite an interesting one down in University of Tasmania, which has a slant towards remote and polar medicine, run by a guy called Eddie Albert, which is really interesting. Retrieval, pre-hospital, is related to all of this stuff. Those skills are arguably more useful than hardcore medical skills here. And there's actually a pre-hospital fellowship, probably a bit further down the track for you guys, but pre-hospital in a similar way to wilderness medicine, if you consider it a separate specialty, is legitimising itself by creating structured programs like the one at the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. So some things that you can sign up for, and maybe some letters you can get and that kind of stuff. Things to read, there's a couple of journals there. I'm conscious it's 7:45, so I might just hurry up a little bit, but I can email you these lists if you like. There's a couple of good journals you can read, some guidelines by some different organisations. Oxford Handbook has a wilderness medicine, and there's a couple of other texts there as well. I'll send that to you later. Networking ideas. It's really important to meet people in this area because it's so poorly defined, so delightfully poorly defined. You really need to work out what other people are doing and collaborate. And what you guys are doing by starting a society is exactly that. So good work. Keep doing things like this. So follow Tom Rowena's Facebook group. The two of the bigger groups internationally would be the Wilderness Medical Society in the States. They're very US-centric, but they are big. There's a UK group which has just changed its name from MEDEX to World Extreme Medicine. They're a really interesting bunch, and they do some fantastic conferences. And there's a couple of other societies. Has anyone seen the adventuremedic.com? Really cool website. So it covers a lot of this stuff, and for you, it has some really interesting ideas for electives. So it's an excellent resource for anyone with a mind for the outdoors that's studying medicine. I'd really encourage you to, if nothing else, remember that website and have a look at it. Ideas of things to work. Use your elective. Your elective is a gift in your training. It is a chance for many things, but one of those things could be getting out and doing some stuff like this if you're interested. Some other groups, but anyway, we'll move on. Some final things to consider. I'm almost finished. Is this a full career for you or something on the side? I would say at this point in time, it would have to be something on the side. It's not to say it's not worth pursuing, but you'll need to do another type of medicine as well. I think there's going to be an increase in demand. That might change. It might become a fully fledged specialty in its own right. People are travelling more. People are doing crazy things. Westerners are going around spending money climbing mountains and doing stuff. So there'll be more demand for it. I argue that doing this stuff will make you a better doctor. Not everyone will appreciate that, but I could not believe in that more than what I do. So think about that statement. Like, the skills that you learn on a mountain or diving or whatever kind of wilderness setting you're in will make you a much better doctor that you cannot learn in a textbook and you cannot even learn on the wards. I'm going to move on because that's a tangent, but I would really encourage you to not underestimate the value of wilderness to your medical ability. If you do things in the outdoors and you are a doctor, you will find yourself in a situation where you need to do something to help someone, whether you plan to be there or not. So there's an argument that you should equip yourself to handle these situations. You have an obligation to. And it's really just good fun. So what should you do from here? How should you do this? I think you should keep doing, this is just some advice that I wish that I'd had when I was a med student. I think you should keep pursuing your outdoor interests in their own rights, whether it's cross-country skiing or diving or whatever. You should keep doing those things because they are fun. You can use wilderness medicine as a way to try and get more of those fun things. If you are genuinely interested in wilderness medicine itself, that's great. There's things to be learned, but I don't think there's anything wrong with doing wilderness medicine because you like skiing. That is totally fine and a really valid motivation. Also, being a better skier, diver, climber, whatever, will make you a better wilderness doctor. There's nothing worse than being on a mountain, a doctor that can't climb. I'd rather be in trouble with a good climber that doesn't know anything about medicine. You know, you're going to be a liability to yourself and others if you don't have your own set of outdoor skills. So pursuing these things is worth doing. There's no money in it, like we talked about before. That's the same as what I just said. Courses are good, but experience is better. And you should just continue talking about it, reading about it, and making it happen. Ultimately, there's no substitute for just going. So I'll leave you with this final phrase as a parting gift to you. Any other questions? Cool. All right, that's my contact if anyone has questions. Sorry we went over. Yeah. Good luck.
We've got pizza outside for everyone.
Oh,
thank you.
Legend.
The other thing is, so yeah, like I said at the start, if you could fill out the registration, it'd be really helpful for us just because it means that we get more funding, which will ultimately benefit you as well as us. And secondly, we have an event next week just to sort of get to know everyone, which is just indoor rock climbing down at Hard Rock on Swanston Street. So there's a link. All of our events and stuff are via the Facebook page. If you just click the events tab on the Facebook group, you'll find it there. And that one's paid. So that one is $19 per person to cover the cost of hiring all the equipment. So yeah, that's all.